Welcome to the webinar from ISPMA and iSQI. Thank you everybody for joining us today. Today the topic will be Scaled Agile Framework and Product Management. Before we start with our actual topic, I would like to do a short introduction. Hans-Bernd Kittlaus, the chairman of ISPMA, Greg Prickril, ISPMA extended board member, and I, Marcel Schwarzmeier from iSQI, will guide you through this presentation. I will start with giving you some general information about iSQI, who is the international certification body of ISPMA. Afterwards, I will hand over to the experts, who will talk about the certified scaled agile framework and product management. Please feel free to ask questions by using the chat or question function. We will be happy to answer your questions after the webinar. For those who haven't been in contact with iSQI before, some facts and figures for the start. ISQI has been founded in 2004 in Potsdam, Germany, and now we have 3 subsidiaries worldwide in the Netherlands, in UK, and the US. Until today, we conducted over 130,000 exams on 6 continents, in 19 countries, and in 10 languages. We are working together with over 300 invigilators who are conducting exams globally. I would like to explain the cooperation model between ISPMA, the International Software Product Management Association, the certification bodies, and the training providers. The cooperation is based on the certification process ISO IEC 17024, which divides the responsibilities of each party strictly. ISPMA published and maintains the curriculum, the glossary, and certification procedure for the CSPM foundation level and the excellence level. The certification tests are conducted by iSQI, an independent certification body. ISPMA does not conduct trainings. International training providers develop the training materials and conduct the trainings based on the syllabus. Here you see our product portfolio, which contains certifications in many different areas. We started in 2004 with software testing, and now we offer certification in usability, requirement engineering, mobile app testing, and software product management. As software product management is a very important topic and the demand for certification in this area is growing constantly, we give you some insights today. Now I'd like to hand over to our experts. Enjoy the presentation.
Thank you very much, Marcel. This is Hans-Bernd Kittlaus. Let me start with a few words about myself. I am the chairman of ISPMA. I'm also the head of InnoTivum Consulting, which is a training and consulting company focused on software product management. My background is in software, so I've spent all of my career in software working for IBM and the German Savings Banks organization before I started my own company. Since then I've published 2 books on software product management and have done lots of trainings and consulting for all kinds of companies all over the world. Sorry, there's something wrong here. Okay. I would like to introduce Greg Prickril. Greg is a fellow member of ISPMA and also a member of the board. Greg, do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Actually, I think I'll wait until right before my part of the presentation.
Okay. And there's something wrong here with the sequence. Let me say a few extra words about ISPMA. ISPMA is the International Software Product Management Association. We have currently about 900 members all over the world, and ISPMA has the objective to establish software product management as a discipline of its own, both in academia and in the industries. ISPMA is a non-profit organization with quite a number of members from academia, but also from companies and consulting organizations. We develop a book of knowledge on SPM, and that is documented in the syllabi that we publish. And all of that is based on the SPM framework. The framework shows on one page the structure of what we consider as the contents of software product management. So you can see here 7 columns. The core activities of product managers are product strategy and product planning, the orchestration of the functional units that you can see on the right side of the chart, the 4 columns on the right side, and participation in strategic management. Those are activities on a business unit or corporate level. This structure of the framework is also the structure of ISPMA's curriculum for trainings and certification. ISQI is our partner for certification worldwide, and we are very happy that we can do this webinar jointly with ISQI. With that, I would, this is the structure of the curriculum. So here you can see the foundation level and 4 modules on the excellence level. For all of these, we provide certification, and hundreds of product managers have already participated in ISPMA-based trainings. With that, I would like to hand over to Greg. Greg, maybe you can start with introducing yourself.
I will. Thanks so much for the introduction, Hans-Bernd, and thank you, Marcel. Really excited to be here today. I have been doing product management for over 15 years, mainly at huge software vendors. So I started as a product manager at IBM, then worked at Microsoft for several years in Redmond, and then was recruited by SAP. I moved to Germany. You can probably tell from my accent, I am not German, I'm an American. And for the last couple of years, I've had my own consulting and training practice, and I help organizations take a more strategic approach to product and solution development. And I give ISPMA-based courses, and as you heard before, I'm on the board and active in the organization. So let's talk very quickly about the goals and non-goals for today. I would like to give you an overview of SAFE, which is a specific framework for scaling Agile, and I will map their worldview to ISPMA and how we look at software product management. I'll give you some of my impressions, kind of subjective things that I've picked up as I took the course and as I've participated in SAFE ceremonies. I obviously can't go into a ton of details. SAFE itself is kind of a conglomeration of a lot of other disciplines and bodies of thought. So I'll give you an overview. Hopefully that's a pointer so you can tell if it's relevant to you or how relevant it is to you, and some of my impressions. So for some reason it's not paging on my side. Maybe Hans-Bernd could page for me. There we go. So what's the background? How did I get involved in this? I've been thinking about scaling Agile for a long time. The first book I bought on the topic was in 2008 when I was at Sprint. When I was at SAP, we had 50 or 60 developers split across 5 locations, and Scrum, as it's defined in the Scrum Guide, just was not cutting it. I started hearing a lot about SAFe here and there on LinkedIn, from talking to friends, on doing research on Agile in general. So I decided to take the plunge. Almost a year ago, I went to Brussels and took a 4-day class, and I am now certified as a program consultant in SAFe. Another page, please. Not sure what's going on. I need, somebody. I think we skipped one. Yeah. So what is the state of software development today? Basically, everybody is doing Agile, almost everybody. Scrum is clearly, if we look at the statistics, the most popular approach to Agile. I need you to go back a slide. I think we skipped a slide. And as software becomes more ubiquitous, what we're finding is a lot of companies that traditionally did other things like hardware development or toys, cars, planes, whatever, are getting pushed into the software development world. And the solutions are more complex, so we need a more complex approach. Lean is becoming an important guiding principle. That's something else that you'll read a lot, Lean software development, how we combine Lean and Agile to provide more value to customers. And you will see that Lean is an important body of knowledge that contributed to SAFe. So page, please. So beyond Lean, the next thing that we need to think about is systems thinking. That has inspired a lot of thought in this area of scaling Agile. So not just SAFe, a lot of other approaches, and it's a pretty simple concept. It says in complex systems you need to think about the entire thing end to end, because optimizing part of it may not improve output and actually may decrease overall output. A really simple analogy is thinking about the movement in a watch. So it's a very complex mechanism. And you can imagine that if I put all my effort into making one gear work perfectly or one spring work perfectly, it may not, create a timepiece that keeps time better, because I haven't really thought about that entire system. And of course, the same thing applies to software. Very complex systems, we need to take an end-to-end approach, not just optimize our part of it, but think about the flow through the entire system. And systems thinking converges very nicely with Lean. So next slide, please. So what is Lean? It comes from the world of manufacturing. There are a lot of definitions. I have my own. And based on what I've read, based on the people who really developed this area, which is Toyota in Japan, I consider Lean an approach to creating customer value that's based on two things: respecting people and continuous improvement. Everything else in Lean follows from there. And it's interesting to note that it developed in the manufacturing world, and software is a little different. In software development, we're more on the side that they would consider R&D. So we create one thing, the first kind of golden build of the software, and then manufacturing in our world is pretty trivial, right? We just copy it to a server so people can download it. Maybe we copy it to DVDs so that people can install it. So Lean, very influential in manufacturing and is making big inroads into software as well. Next slide, please. So what are the important concepts? Lean focuses on the creation of customer value. And we look at all of our activities, and they fall into two categories. They either create direct customer value or they don't. And if they don't, there's a label for that. And it's kind of contentious, but we call activities that don't create customer value waste. And some waste you can't get rid of. If you think about human resources in an organization, they're necessary. You have to manage people's careers, you have to hire people, but some people would make the argument, and I think it's valid, they do not create anything that customers would directly pay for. So by the Lean definition, HR is waste. Doesn't mean it's not important or even critical. It just means we really focus on the activities that create customer value. We try to maximize those. We look at the things that don't. We look at waste and we try to minimize it. And then we look at the systems thinking idea. We look at the entire chain of something that creates value for our customers. For a software product, we look at all the steps we have to go through to create a successful product. And one of the ideas is managing work in progress. So how many tasks we have going on at one time. And what experience has shown is that there's an ideal amount of tasks that should be, in progress. If we go above that, we reduce overall throughput. So those are some of the lean concepts. If you don't know about lean, I encourage you to read about it. There's a lot of material available on lean as it applies to software. So have a look. If somebody could page again. Yeah, so what is scale? We're talking about scaling Agile. I did a lot of research. I didn't find a definition that satisfied me, but my observation is that we can scale along a number of dimensions. So we might be scaling on the functional breadth of the system that we're creating, the software product that we're creating. They can get extremely complex. If we think about something like SAP's ERP, we think about Windows, very complex products. We may have to scale based on the number of people that are contributing to the product, even if functionally it's kind of simple. Once we get above 10 or 20 people, we need to, adopt new approaches. Simple team-oriented, single team-oriented approaches will start falling apart. And then we can look at things about critical dependencies. We can look at geographic dispersion of teams, and we find ourselves needing new approaches. That once again, Scrum as it's defined in the Scrum Guide is insufficient. So page, please. So what can go wrong at scale? I think we skipped a slide. The first problem is insufficient or ineffective communication. So once we get beyond just having 5 or 10 people that we're sitting with that we see every day, communication starts breaking down. We can also have difficulty getting insight into the overall development progress. So in the case I talked about before, we had 5 teams. There were teams in India, in Bulgaria, in Germany, even a few in the States. It was very difficult at one point in time to know what the status was. Were we on schedule? And as human beings, we just have difficulty grokking or understanding the breadth of very complex products. So I worked on a lot of integration products. They would take data from one system and pump it over to another. And already, just that one product, it was very difficult to really understand the full breadth. We all kind of knew our corner of the product. We knew the general capabilities, but really understanding it, certainly from a technical perspective, end to end, nobody did. And once communication starts falling apart, once we have difficulty understanding the status, all kinds of other things happen. There are probably more symptoms than root causes, but we lose velocity, we don't develop as quickly, quality usually suffers, and so forth. So there are definitely a set of problems that scale brings. And we can think of SAFE as one of the approaches that helps us better address these problems when we're scaling. So what is SAFE? This is their definition. I think it's interesting. They call it a freely revealed knowledge base of patterns for lean agile development. So it's not just about agile development. They put lean in the basic definition. And this freely revealed terminology is interesting. So I will talk about that later, kind of the business model around SAFE and how free it really is. But for now, this is their definition. If we go to the next slide, how does it address these things? So we listed a bunch of problems that I encounter when I need to scale. What SAFE does is create a number of abstractions above just an individual product team that help me define how I will organize the development effort, how I will manage requirements, how I can drive decisions that happen at the highest levels in the organization through development. So that's one of the ways, and we will look at these various layers. They extend planning horizons beyond what you would normally expect in a Scrum shop. So we're building really big things, and we simply cannot plan at a strategic level every 2 weeks. There's just too much overhead. So the planning cycles, in a sense, are longer. You will see how they handle that. They use Kanban boards to track progress. Some people may not have seen Kanban boards. It's a pretty simple concept. There's a series of phases, and there are physical markers that show how work goes from, for example, being conceived all the way through from being implemented. And we can track all kinds of work that way. They decouple objectives, business objectives, from what's done at the development level. So they bring in this overriding kind of business context which helps keep people on the same page. And one of the most interesting elements of SAFE is this idea of doing really face-to-face co-located planning. So if you have 200 people in your development organization, that means when we do planning, all 200 of them will be co-located, and we'll figure out what is going to happen in kind of the next big iteration. So these are the basic approaches they use to address the problems we mentioned about scaling. These are the benefits that they list. I can imagine these things are true. I think they're very hard to measure, especially something like productivity. The most compelling one to me is faster time to market. I can imagine that once you really understand the complexity of what you're building, change your practices to take that complexity into account. I can very well imagine. I have certainly been in circumstances where we didn't have the right scaling mechanisms in place, and it caused delays, without a doubt. And we would also expect that once we get everybody on the same page, once we get everybody kind of executing on the same strategy, that we could reduce defects. Some of these are the kinds of things that Scrum itself might say. So take them with a grain of salt. That's what they say. What are their core values? You know, below anything else, these are the values. I love them. I think they make a lot of sense. So quality has to be built in, so that we're not talking about testing at the end. At every phase, we have to be thinking about quality. It has to be designed into the product. We also place a lot of emphasis on aligning things. So we have these different levels of abstraction. We have a lot of people working. So there are clear mechanisms and approaches to keeping people aligned. There is a huge focus on execution. So I find it to be a very pragmatic framework. And the idea is, how can we execute? How can we create value and get it to the customer as quickly as possible? And some of these may sound, you know, just like generalities, or kind of, you know, things that anybody would say almost about any type of approach to work. But transparency is also important, particularly transparency when things are not going well. So we want to design a framework, an approach to development that forces us to be honest with ourselves. Because if you've done software development, you know that's a big problem, that we end load the pain. We all know that things aren't going well. We don't have the right mechanisms in place to force us to admit it. And SAFE has specific approaches to address that. So what are their key principles? You can see them. There are 9 of them. Some of them come directly out of some of the other kind of, whatever you want to call them, systems of thought that we've spoken about. So for example, applying cadence and synchronizing, we could say, comes from Agile. As same thing, building incrementally. We can assume variability, and there's a lot of thinking about variability in lean thinking, for example. It just says to apply systems thinking, so think end to end, and of course having this economic view. And I might expand that to say, you know, it's not always about economics, but think about efficiency. How can I generate the most value with the lowest investment in resources? And some of these, like decentralized decision making, are really part and parcel of Scrum. When we think about self-organizing teams, that's a mechanism to support this decentralized decision making. So what are these levels of abstraction in SAFE? I will start with the second one, which is the value stream. And a value stream creates something called a solution. And the framework itself does not have a strict definition of what a solution is. So you can think about it, the product. But at this level, there is a series of steps, which is a value stream, that generates a product. And the idea is that I need certain people whose day job is to think about this solution at that level. So to think about the product end to end. If I go down a step, there's a program level. And at the program level, I'm thinking about maybe feature areas or individual products. It depends on the complexity of the solution. And central to SAFE is this idea of an agile release train. And it's just a kind of clever name for a team of agile teams. So this is where we go beyond focus on an individual team that I would find in normal Scrum, and I really think about this abstraction so that I have a team of teams, and below that are just teams, like you would find in any Agile methodology. SAFE doesn't have a particular opinion about which approach to Agile you should take. These teams might be managing their work with Scrum, they might be using Kanban or extreme programming, doesn't matter much, but SAFE I think does expect them to be using Agile. And then above that we have the portfolio level. And you can think of that as how I control things across value streams. So if my organization produces many software products, I need to have some visibility above them, and I might have initiatives like, hey, I think all our products need to be delivered as a service. I can manage those kinds of initiatives through this portfolio level. And of course what comes out of that is the budget to invest in various value streams. So let's go to the next slide, please. So what is an Agile release train? I told you it's a team of teams. It's long-lived. It's not reorganized all the time. Typically comprises between 50 and 125 people. And I think the idea there is that you have fewer than 50 people, you will probably get less value out of something like SAFE. SAFE takes a pretty big investment. I think it can still be valuable though, but below 50 you would want to think twice about how you're approaching that. And more than 125 people may also become unmanageable. So at that level you would start maybe thinking about creating other trains. They are typically organized by component or feature. That's a classic discussion in team organization. Features are usually better, and just really a central concept in SAFE. They talk about Agile release trains, it's really almost the core concept. So next page. Here's the cardinality. It can be kind of hard to follow, but you could imagine a portfolio addresses one-to-many value streams which produce solutions. The value streams can, basically have several programs that are delivering things to them. So that's one-to-many. At the program level, I have an Agile release train, which is this team of teams. And then below the program, I have the actual Agile teams, which are one-to-many. And we will go through a quick example in a few moments, but hopefully this helps you kind of internalize the cardinality between these layers. So next slide. Here is an example. I took this from my past. I worked at a company that created surveillance solutions. So their basic competency was hanging cameras all over the place, collecting the video that came from them, doing analytics, and then responding somehow. So one application of that in this company, this Spooky Eye Solutions, they have an airport security offering. So they have a command and control center. They have a bunch of video surveillance. They also do passenger screening, so they can install the machines and actually do the operations around people going through the security, so it's not just surveillance. They also do safe cities, which is essentially applying surveillance to keep a city safe. But they also do emergency response communication. Part of that, because they have the infrastructure, is doing citizen issue management, so if you find a pothole or a broken pipe, you can report it. And they have another solution which they call safe installations. And this could be military installations, things like substations on the electric grid. So you can see that these different solutions, they belong to kind of the same domain. It's about security, about surveillance. There are individual parts of these that are shared between them, like the command and control center. But of course, they all offer, there's some difference because they address different problem domains. So that is the company. These are the offerings that they take to market. And let's think about how I might organize that using SAFE. So let's go to the next page. I would think about value streams, and here I would just define a value stream per solution. That's one way to do it. If one of these value streams was really small, it may make sense to combine them, and maybe I have whatever I want to call it, like civil surveillance value streams, but here we're going to define a value stream per solution that I take to market. Below those, there are programs that are developing some of the pieces, And under the airport security value stream, I have a couple of programs. One that really does the specific airport security, and that's where I house the command and control. It's used by other value streams, but I manage it from a development perspective as part of airport security. If I look at this airport security example, there are a series of teams. Below the program, we talked about these agile teams. Very often organizations give them names. Here I've chosen elements from the periodic chart, but you can see that, for example, Helium does the video analytics for airport, and Cobalt, that team is responsible for the software that does passenger screening. SAFE also has this concept of suppliers, external organizations that contribute to our solution or our value stream, and we could go through and continue kind of enumerating these, but this might be the structure. It's a company that has 3 solutions. They have a value stream for each. They decompose those into programs so that they can manage the work of multiple agile teams. Let's go to the next slide. SAFE talks about cadence. This is just this kind of regular iteration. And the way it works is there are 5 iterations that are called, together program increments. By default, they're 2 weeks. So if you've done Agile or Scrum, think about it like this. We are going to plan for a set of 5 sprints. And we will still do sprint level planning, but because this is a big complex thing and we need to think about dependencies, we will plan 5 sprints basically at some level at a time. And it's an interesting approach because 4 of those sprints are just normal sprints where all the teams are working. The 5th sprint is reserved for planning, which means, there's a lot of overhead in planning. I told you that people co-locate, and for innovation. So it's almost like a breather, an opportunity for the teams to sit back, plan together, figure out what they're going to do over the next 4 sprints from a high level, and also work on innovation things. Just like Scrum itself, you will see that SAFE has this emphasis on really showing that things work. I won't go into all the details, but basically at every detail, when I get to the end of these planning cycles, I want to see everything working together. So I can't just develop within these silos and then try to integrate things at the end. So that is the idea of cadence. I think it's an interesting approach. If we go to the next slide, here are the accountabilities. This is where we start finding intersection points with ISPMA. So at the portfolio level, there are certain roles. These people have accountability for different things. There is a program portfolio management team who makes these portfolio decisions. At the portfolio level, there are these things called epics. Think of them as user stories, but at the portfolio level. If we go down, and of course an enterprise architect that would span all the value streams, very important role, and you will see that in most of the levels, you have somebody that's responsible from a content or functional perspective, somebody who's technically responsible, like an architect, and then somebody who's responsible for managing the process itself, making sure that we're doing SAFE in the right way. At the value stream level, that person is called a value stream engineer. Very important person, loosely analogous to Scrum Master, I think, in Agile, in the sense that they focus on the process. They're not people managers. Of course, they need to know the content, but they're working with the functional people, with the technical people, with providers to make sure that everything comes together. At the program level, I have a release train engineer. That's the person who keeps the Agile release train moving forward. Notice there's a product manager here. So at the value level, we had a solution manager who was responsible for content and strategy. At the program level, it's a product manager. If we go down to the team level, here it's structured like what you would expect an Agile team to look like, and there we have a product owner. So there is this kind of hierarchy. We've got somebody looking at the entire value stream, the entire solution. Per program, we have somebody thinking about the product that that program is responsible for. And then at the team level, we have a product owner. And the way that tends to work between the program and the team is that the product manager is doing product management. For example, the way ISPMA defines it. You saw the framework before with Hans-Bernd, and I'll go into a little more detail. So they focus on the more strategic elements, and at the team level, the product owner is a little more tactical, working every day with the team. It's not a big wall between them. They're a big virtual team. The product owner is interested in the strategy, but if we look at where they're spending most of their time, that's very often how it kind of plays out. Next slide, please. So what about business motivation? That is the term I use to talk about strategy, vision, all those things, and they're very important in SAFE. They're defined and aligned at all the versions, at all the levels, pardon me, and it's the functional responsibles, the solution manager, the product manager, who is responsible for defining these things. And you can see this idea of objectives at different levels. At the team level, we still have sprint goals, so the upshot is this is not just a technical framework, far from it. We really look at our business motivation, what we're trying to achieve, and there are things built into the framework to ensure that we don't lose sight of our business intent or goals. Next slide. How do we manage requirements? It's done in a very kind of scrummy, agile way. These, what you would call a user story at the team level, have different names, and you can just think of these things as different levels of abstraction. So there is this hierarchy. And at the portfolio level, across value streams, I have these things called epics. It's not the same thing as you'll read about epics in Scrum necessarily, but these are things, like I said before, we want the entire portfolio to be delivered as a service. How can I define that and manage that? At the solution level, these things in the backlog are called capabilities. At the program level, they're called features. And then by the time we get to the team level, we have user stories like we're used to dealing with. They also differentiate between kind of normal epics and capabilities. They have these things called enablers, which may not generate direct customer value but have to be done. We might put things that we would typically call technical debt in there, like re-architecting and so forth, but that's an overview of how requirements are handled. Next slide. So once again, this program increment, this 5-week thing, just to kind of underscore what I said before, the default is that we do this 10 weeks at a time. We look out and we think at a high level of what we're going to deliver for the next 10 weeks. Planning is done on 2 very intensive days where the whole team gets together. I've been involved in those, and it's really impressive to see, you know, maybe 120 people in the same place trying to plan what they're going to do, but you just can't replace that face-to-face interaction. The business motivation or the business objectives are communicated explicitly. I told you they're an important part of the framework. There are these people called business owners who look at the backlogs at these various levels and ascribe to them business value. So think of those, you know, what function points are to developers or story points. There are business points that can be ascribed, so the business people can say, hey, this thing is really valuable from a business perspective. Irrespective of how much it takes to create it, it has huge business value. And there's this practice where we plan for a day. At the end of the day, leadership looks at that, tries to make some adjustments, comes up with some suggestions, and on the second day we incorporate those into the plan, and then we know what we're going to do for the next 4 sprints. After those 4 sprints, we will get back together and we will plan the next 4. That's basically how planning is done. So how do you implement SAFE? First, you need to train people. You need to identify change agents. You need to get leadership on board. And then you've got to train the train. So the Agile Release Train, the people who will be participating have to be trained. And in the course, they talked a lot about get the trains launched. That's what you should focus on. So get things moving. And because this is a lean approach, we're going to continuously improve them. So there's not separate lean agile training that's done. You can buy the training material from the company that creates SAFE and provide that, although you don't have to. I talked about the focus on getting trains launched, and there is this lean agile center of excellence where you have very smart people who can provide guidance to the teams that are actually executing SAFE. Next slide. So what is the upshot for product managers? I was very pleasantly surprised. So I found SAFE very compatible with my kind of perspective on product management, and my perspective is highly influenced by ISPMA, so I found no major points of contention. I think SAFE acknowledges that you need this functional definition accountability at various roles, so they handle the scaling while preserving the role of product managers. I think the way they describe the relationship between product managers and product owners is healthy. It makes sense. It was consistent with what I've seen in practice. They talk about this idea of cyber physical systems. I think that's a funny term. But the idea is it's not just software. It can also be hardware as well. By the way, there can also be services that are delivered as part of the solution. And more product managers. I can tell you in my client base, there are organizations that had no intention of being software companies. They are now software companies. So, the emphasis on Agile and Lean just makes sense, and I don't think they hold themselves out as the greatest original thinkers on the planet necessarily. They packaged a lot of stuff that existed into a framework that you can follow and get value out of. But I really like the idea that they didn't just try to reinvent or rename the wheel. They leverage what's there. What they've built on top of that is something that gives you guidance, proven patterns, as they put it. Next slide. Here is the framework again, and we can map this several ways to SAFE. If I look at the third column, which is product planning, these things like doing the roadmap, setting the strategy, doing release planning, that has a different kind of flavor in Agile, but same idea. I have to plan the work that I'm going to do. We talked about requirements engineering, so they are addressing the same topics. Back to this idea of product managers working with product owners, I would expect product owners to spend most of their time doing things in this product planning column. If we look at product strategy, we think about sourcing and pricing, ecosystem management. We talked about providers. None of these things go away. They may not all be addressed specifically in the SAFE framework, but they have these functional accountables who are responsible for these things. And by the way, at the program level, I would expect product managers to be spending most of their time doing this product strategy stuff. And then if we look at the far left column, strategic management, that's how product managers manage up. And there are a bunch of processes that happen at the corporate level. SAFE calls it the portfolio level, where we define this corporate strategy, where we do portfolio management. So we don't have enough time today for me to do all the detailed mapping, but what I will tell you is I find the Scaled Agile Framework super compatible with ISPMA. I think ISPMA can bring a lot of knowledge and specific approaches and techniques that can make product managers and product owners more effective. So I think these things are highly complementary. I think they come together beautifully. So next page. Yeah, this is just kind of highlighting the areas that are of specific relevance. What are my general impressions? I think SAFE is very well thought out. It's based on solid fundamentals. Some tension I felt as not somebody who would directly adopt SAFE, but as somebody who would help customers deliver it. They say it's freely revealed, but there are a lot of restrictions I found around their IP. If you look at their overview presentation, they say you can't use this if you have anything that competes with us. If you want to give certified training, you have to buy the materials from them. And that's fine. That's a business choice that they made, but it's not, don't confuse it with just kind of this open source thing. It's not. There's a strong business model behind it, and it takes a while to understand and internalize that, especially as a service provider like I am. And although it has framework in the name, there's enough prescriptive stuff that it feels to me, just personally, a bit more like a methodology. If we think about this continuum where there's a framework like Scrum that's by design incomplete, and then these really full prescriptive methodologies, it handles a complex problem space, so SAFE is probably transitioned a little closer to the end of the spectrum where it feels more like a methodology. Still plenty of flexibility there, but there is quite a bit of prescriptive stuff in terms of how you plan. And they say you can, I think, pick and choose. There's some fundamentals that are important, but yeah, there is a lot to take in. It's not just an hour of reading to understand what SAFe is and how it works. So it's pretty complex. Next page. There are a bunch of case studies on the site, so go to scaledagileFramework.com. It's great. These were published by the companies, not by the organization. So this is them telling you how they got value out of SAFe. I've read several of them. Because they're not centrally edited, they're different, you know, but I think if you look at enough of them, you will get a great idea about how people implemented it, what value they got out of it. I'm still digesting these things, really interesting reading. Next slide. Here are a bunch of resources that I think are highly relevant. There's a bunch of information about SAFe, about Lean, about Agile. Some of these came from the course. Some of these are books that I've read and really enjoyed, like Scaling Lean and Agile Development. There's a great video, SAFe in 7 minutes. So they're more concise than I am, and it comes directly from Scaled Agile. So you might take a look at that if you're interested. And with that, yeah, I think we have a little bit of time. I went a little long, but I think we have plenty of time for questions and answers.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Greg, for your excellent presentation and also for your positioning of SAFe in relation to ISPMA. Like you just said, we still have a couple of minutes for questions. So please enter your questions into the chat function that GoToWebinar provides. So far I do not see any questions, so let me start with a question of my own. Greg, you talked about the size of the organization as a criterion for selecting SAFe or not selecting SAFe. Do you see other criteria that are also relevant?
Yeah, I think those dimensions of scaling that I talked about. So because there's enough overhead, I think the number of people is really relevant. I wouldn't take this 50 to 125 as law, but it's a nice guideline. And yeah, all those elements of scaling, the complexity of the solution, geographic distribution of the team may force you to, you know, up your game, in other words. Just doing basic Scrum the way it's defined in the Scrum Guide will probably fail you. And then when you have really complex dependencies, so I have clients that typically deliver solutions, or actually always deliver solutions that comprise software, hardware, and services. Some of those are third-party services. In this case, they don't really have a huge number of software developers. In some cases, they may have 10 to 20, but they're in a highly regulated industry, which means getting things right is critical. They're in a safety-centric industry, which means if things fail, people die. And the dependencies between all these parts of the solutions are such that they are now searching for ways that they can scale. And the driving factor is definitely not number of developers. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much, Greg. I have a second question. When we look at recent survey results by the Scrum Alliance and by other companies that do services on agile development, what is quite interesting is that most organizations do not go to Agile 100%, but in most organizations you have a mix of different development methodologies. Does that work with SAFe, or does SAFe require an organization to go to Agile 100%?
You know, I think that's a great question, Hans-Bernd. And I think what's interesting about it is how do you define if an organization is 100% Agile? And I don't think there's a way. So there are a lot of organizations, for example, that claim to be doing Scrum, we all tend to adapt work practices to fit our culture, our needs, and I don't know of a checklist that I can go down and say, if you do these things, you are doing Scrum. If you're doing these things, you are not. So it's really tricky. So I can tell you my impression was from listening to people who have done a lot of implementations that there is definitely flexibility there. And there's even a spectrum of to what degree people adopt SAFe. So I think they would be the first to tell you it is not all or nothing. I think there are a few things that they consider almost sacrosanct or really, you know, if you're not doing these things, we don't consider you that safety. But I don't even remember from SAFe having this list that says, thou shalt do these things to be considered, you know, safe. I think they take this lean, pragmatic approach of, you know, we assume that you're doing iterative development. There were discussions about how you could incorporate some teams that are doing waterfall, so I know that those discussions are happening. But I think one of the problems with Agile, with Scrum in particular, is, at least in my knowledge, maybe you've heard, you know, something different, but there isn't this grand centrally defined checklist that tells me whether an organization is really doing Agile, and I would say the same thing roughly applies to SAFe.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Greg. I have not received any additional questions here.
I see one question here on my side. The question is, which function is the epic owner?
Yeah, so I would first caution you not to get confused with epics the way they're now being used in Agile. It's like these kind of really big stories that get decomposed into user stories. In IT is, you know, these terms are overloaded, but you could think of epics from the SAFe perspective as these initiatives are kind of user stories that I defined at the portfolio level, which means they impact multiple value streams. And the idea is that there are things in the organization. I keep giving that example. Let's say we've got our example that we looked at. We do airport security, we do safe city, and we decide that by 2020 we need to be able to offer all of our solutions, you know, we need to be able to deliver them as a service, so software as a service. In other, you know, methodologies, there's not a clear way to manage that. SAFe defines this kind of backlog at that portfolio level, and you can think of the owner as the person that's responsible for an individual epic, and these things would cascade. So at the portfolio level, I may make the decision, thou shalt be delivered as a service. That means that at the value stream level, those backlogs, the capabilities at that level, need to reflect that that work has to be done, and it cascades down to the individual teams. So just think of that as somebody who's responsible for making sure that this initiative or this epic actually cascades and impacts our development. I hope that answers the question.
I think so. Good. I don't see that anybody had more questions about that. I would say thank you very much, Greg. Thank you very much, Hans-Bernd, for this presentation.
Thank you, Marcel. And if anybody has additional questions, feel free to contact Greg, Marcel, or myself. Here are the email addresses.
Yeah, thanks everybody for your time, and please do follow up if you have questions. Would love to hear them. Thanks so much, Marcel, for hosting this, and thanks Hans-Bernd for the kind of facilitation, emceeing this thing.
Good.
All right. Thanks to everybody, and have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.